I used to think the gap between where I am today and where my mentors are, people who've literally sold their companies for tens of millions of dollars, were a lot of strategies and tactics that for some reason I just didn't have access to. I just thought they had some secret magic trick or something. But after spending time with them, sitting in rooms with people who are literally worth tens of millions of dollars, people who've sold their companies to conglomerates like Target, I've realized that the advice they gave me behind closed doors, it's so much different than the advice you see on social media. It's usually advice that's way quieter in a way, but it's also advice that for some reason, even though it's more simple, it's way harder to implement. They didn't teach me to hustle harder or be more chill. They taught me 3 specific laws on how to think, how to trust myself, and what to cut out from my life. And it all starts with the law of leadership. I'm reading a book that I got from a mentor who makes tens of millions of dollars a month, and it's called the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And out of all the laws, the first 2 are the 2 that really changed the way I thought about marketing and positioning. It's the law of leadership and the law of the category. And he really nailed this in my mind. He said the law of leadership says that you have to be first. So for example, if I ask you who's the first president of the United States, you're gonna obviously know that it was George Washington. But if I ask you who was the second one, now some people might actually know who it was. I had no idea. I had to Google it. And that's the case for the majority of people. It's the same for cars. Who was the first big company that made manufacturing cars more famous? It was Ford. Who was the second one? I have no idea. And regardless of the reality of whether if the product is better or not, or if the president was better or not, the first one is always perceived as better. Now, obviously, you can't always be the first one in the market. And obviously, I'm only speaking about products and services. Like being the first obviously means you're the disruptor in the space. And you can't always be the first one in the market. But here's where the other law comes in place. So the first law, the law of leadership, means if you are the leader, you're going to be considered the best. So if you can disrupt some industry, then you're gonna be first, and essentially you're gonna be considered as best. Now, most of the times you're not going to be able to be the first one in a space. So that's the second law that comes into place. It's the law of category. So if you can't be the first in the space, you can be the first in the same space, but in a different category. The misconception with this and the really good thought, the process and the advice I got from my mentor was a lot of people really mess up the fact that you have to niche down. So because they can't be first, they think that they have to niche down. Niching down usually looks very ridiculous. In fitness, you see this all the time where, I help this specific person, this specific age, they have this specific job, and they have this specific problem. Now you can do that, but your total addressable market becomes very small and very competitive as well. A lot of people think that they just have to niche down, niche down, niche down, niche down. I help left-handed women with their hormonal problems improve their gut who live in South America. Like some shit like that, man, it's ridiculous. And that's where you have to understand that you don't have to make up a niche, but bring in a category where you can be the first. You don't have to be super specific. Just remember this word. Again, you can be a fitness coach for women. Now there's a billion coaches for women, or a billion relationship coaches, or a billion finance coaches. Just remember these 4 words. If you can be better, if you can be new, if you can be different, or if you can be easier. So if you can get people results in an easier way, you're kind of crafting your own category. If you can do it in a better way, now this has to be in the perception of the consumer, not yours, because obviously we're all biased. We all say we have the best product and the best service, but on the perception of the customer, how can you be better? How can you perceive that's new? How can you perceive that's different? How can you make sure that people have the result they're looking for in an easier way as compared to your competitor? You don't have to niche down, but if you can figure out how you can craft a category of one in the same industry, then you're gonna have a better chance of being more successful. Now, this second advice I got from somebody who sold their company to a billion-dollar company, and I'm gonna spare the details because it's a very fun story that how I got to meet them. But we sat down for a couple hours and I just asked questions and I listened very attentively. And they didn't give me the advice that you usually would see online on wannabe gurus that read off a script that ChatGPT made. These were people, I think they're in their 60s, and they've built and sold many companies for many multi-million dollars. So they know what the fuck is up. They actually know. And I was just asking them about, how did you get to this place? Or what would you tell your 20-year-old self? What would you tell yourself in the past? Like if you were to live again, what would you do differently? And one of the advice that she gave me, she said, trust your gut and be open to the messages you're going to receive. At first, this sounds very stupid because you hear this all the time from older gurus. Trust your gut or whatever the fuck. But I asked her about okay, how do you trust your gut? Like how do you listen? Everyone speaks about this mysterious thing of like, yeah, you trust your gut or listen to your gut. It's like, what are you listening to? Who are you listening to? Now, obviously in faith, I'm a follower of Christ, and you are able to connect with yourself and with God when you read the word. Behind me, you always see a Bible. It's right there. And I find this one of the things that's probably the hardest, because if you're an entrepreneur, you're always working on the next thing. And it's funny enough, in front of me, I have my planner, and I write in my planner, but also in front of me, I have my notes app of all the things that I want to do today. And it's always this race of doing things, doing more things, crossing things off the list. Because, as an entrepreneur, and if you're a coach and you have your own company, you're wearing 1,000 different hats. And there's always a million different things that you have to do. And because you're always busy, you're not always productive. You're always listening to everything else that's outside of yourself instead of listening to you. Nobody really tells you this. And I asked her, how do you do this? And it's probably the hardest thing that I'm trying to still do and still master. And the reason I'm looking at you right now is because I'm trying to read the notes and trying to find a way of really explaining this to you, because it's not easy. The concept of it's easy, just listen to yourself, but it's like, bro, because we're so busy, we can't even, we go to bed thinking about business. We wake up thinking about Slack messages where we have to answer, the emails, the posts that we have to do. And the hardest thing for us to do is to disconnect. And I hear this also, it's like you have to disconnect to be able to connect. And that's why people meditate, that's why people pray. When you are able to quiet down everything that's outside of you, I think you're able to listen to yourself. And this is where people speak about, listening to your nudges or trusting your intuition. You can't really do those things if there's just a shit ton of noise out there. And if you're always busy or you're always trying to be productive because you're forcing your way through trying to achieve a result. And I think sometimes that's counterproductive. Yes, you have to work hard, you have to hustle, you have to do all this shit. But sometimes it makes it harder because you're forcing yourself to do a lot of things and you can't really listen to what's going on inside of your mind. So essentially she said that you have to be able to sit down and be quiet, which is that's the weirdest thing, man, because if you're watching this, chances are you have huge goals. You'll have, I want to make 100K a month, I want to do whatever. And you always think, and this is where it's so hard for me to comprehend. You have these goals and you have to work hard, but then the harder you work, the more anxious you are, the busier you are, the more stressed you are, the harder it is to actually listen to yourself and get those downloads in a way and listen to your gut to make better decisions. So trust your gut and be open to the messages you receive. But you have to put yourself in a position where you can actually listen to those things. So that's number 2. And number 3, also from them as well. She said, you have to master the act of pruning. So pruning is the cutting away of dead or overgrown branches or stems, especially to encourage growth. And it's hard because when something is part of you, it's very hard for you to cut it out of your life. And this comes through a lot of meditation and a lot of self-introspection, where you have to realize that some things that are attached to you no longer serve you, no longer give you life, no longer give you purpose, and no longer move you to the place where you want to be. And part of the things that I've come to realize as you grow businesses and you look to be better and become a better person, become a better human, you're going to make different moves in your life that separate you from past things, and you have to be okay with cutting those things out. In my example, I've moved away from home twice when I was 17, and I had to be okay with just leaving everyone behind, which I was. And then I moved out again. Now where I am, I'm in Europe, and I had to basically cut a lot of things out. And I don't speak with anyone back home other than my parents. I don't speak with a lot of friends who I thought were gonna be my best friends forever from high school. My best friends I can count on a hand, and if that. But you have to be able to cut things out that don't give you positive things. Is addition by subtraction. And after hearing them as such a successful person telling me that it's not about adding more things to your plate, but about cutting things so you can focus on the right things. So again, it's one, you have to be the leader in your market. And if you can't be the leader in your market, be the leader in your category, but don't make the mistake of just niching down just for niching down. Number 2 is trust your gut, but it's not the woo-woo advice of just trust your gut and read a fucking astrology or whatever the fuck. It's actually sit down and give yourself the space to be able to listen to yourself. And number 3, master the act of pruning, which is cutting away those things that are not adding to your life. There's so much to cover. And other than mentors, the other thing that really gives me a lot of breadth of knowledge is books. So I just made a video on my favorite books, as you can see down behind me, my favorite books that I'm going to be reading in 2026, that it's going to benefit you tremendously. So click the video on the screen right now, because that's the video on the best books that you should be reading if you want to be a hyper successful coach and entrepreneur. For now, I'll see you in the next one.